Catus Maximus here, this time with a little video of, I don't know if these are bringbacks, but these are Stanley's US-made lifetime warranty basic screwdriver set. So this is essentially what replaced what would be considered the standard classic Stanley acetate handles US screwdrivers. These were the more budget screwdrivers that were sold, you know, through the early 2000s up through the 2010s. That were always kind of like the base standard. These definitely weren't the best of screwdrivers, but they certainly do hold up more than what you would normally expect for a basic type of screwdriver. And so Stanley kind of created the standard of basic screwdrivers that were decent quality, decent steel, and actually ended up standing up to the test of time. And I do like their very aggressive handles on the old ones. I believe they went overseas and then sales dropped and pretty much people thought if they were Chinese or overseas made that they'd buy anyone. So this is kind of Stanley trying to bring them back and make them in the USA, kind of like how DeWalt did with the main USA tools. In essentially the same market as what these old screwdrivers were. So they do have a little handle system here, or a little, I would say, a wall holder, so you can put these up on a pegboard or something like that, because that's generally what they're designed for. It is a 6-piece set, and so you get 4 flathead screwdrivers, surprisingly enough, and a couple of Phillips. The Phillips is where the biggest changes are. With the flatheads here, they do seem pretty much the same. They do have some deep corrugations. They're advertised as these being cold forged or cold formed screwdriver tips, so they should be pretty darn strong. And if they're using this, and they advertise alloy steel, so what I'm hoping is that they'll essentially be the same as what these old ones were. We can see that the length is just a little bit longer than what they used to be, so that's one difference. These new handles, I would say that they are more ergonomic. They're a little bit more rounded. They're kind of squared off, so you get a little bit of grip, but not as good as these deep corrugations. These deep corrugations, obviously, if your hands are sweaty or you have oil or grease on them, you still have some really deep grooves to get really good grab on them. So even though the ergonomics have improved, obviously the handle is just much more round, and so it'll be easier for your hand to slip on them. That can be a bit of a disappointment, or I should say frustration in certain situations. We're really trying to get some twisting force. Now the biggest difference would be the tips. These are cold form tips. They're kind of like the way the old Milwaukee impact bits used to be, and you can see that. They've been squished, but they don't give you a real defined edge. It's really rounded, and I found that sometimes this style wants to cam out or slip in screws versus the actual machine version. Some people call these machine version, like on the Stanley Fat Max diamond tips, which really aren't a whole lot different from these Stanley USAs, although they have, you know, a rubberized overcoating. And a little bit larger diameter grip. I would still recommend these cheaper Stanleys because you're just not getting much over the Fat Maxes. But as far as comparing the tips, you can see some people call this more of a JIS standard tip, and then this would be non-JIS, although it's kind of difficult with the tips. What I do know with screws, though, is the screws that have the little dot are JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard screws, or ones that don't are not. And so if we say compare the fitment of this, it doesn't want to quite seat in that screw, and you can see that. That's one of the issues with the cold formed bits, is that they tend, surprisingly enough, to work better in the JIS screws because you have just a little bit more clearance in the JIS screws, even though these are not JIS specific tips. And that becomes an issue, and it's really surprising about these cold formed tips. And it's really annoying because you buy a set of Phillips head screwdriver and it really just doesn't fit into a whole lot of screws. It's almost embarrassing. Or when you have these machine bits, they just have better clearances and better tolerances. So this little bit, or this screwdriver, fits perfectly in that screw. So good that, I mean, it almost locks up in there. And on the JIS screw, it also fits really nicely. And so that would probably be my biggest comment to Stanley doing the cold forged tips. Their idea was to make it an extra durable Phillips, and it is. It's just the unfortunate problem is it just doesn't have a very good sizing, not a very good fitment. And the number 2 Phillips is going to be the most used screwdriver in a little basic set like this. So for that reason alone, I'm going to generally recommend people give a pass on these, because unfortunately, this Phillips bit really just is not formed properly. Here's a little green grounding screw that's found in all sorts of power tools, and this would just barely fits in there. You'd end up just stripping out the screw with the screwdriver. So a little disappointed in Stanley for that. They could have done a bit better job shaping the Phillips head bit, and that's real important in a little basic screwdriver set. US made or not, Stanley should have made a different choice there, even though the flatheads are pretty nice. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.